Tonight we present
The Quantum Eclipse. Cape Town, South Africa, October 1936. The morning sky was a tapestry of deep blue and vivid gold, heralding a rare celestial event, the solar eclipse. To most, it was a cause for curiosity and wonder. To Dr. Emil van der Merwe, however, it was the culmination of years of obsessive work that promised to reveal something far more mysterious than anyone could have anticipated. Van der Merwe, a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum mechanics, had been working at the University of Cape Town for nearly a decade. His research focused on understanding quantum entanglement and the possible interaction between distant particles. He had a theory: the phenomena of quantum entanglement, particles influencing each other over vast distances, could be more than just an obscure quantum effect. He believed that certain cosmic events, such as solar eclipses, might induce a temporary alteration in the quantum state of particles. But there was a problem. The theory was unprovable, and van der Merwe's peers often dismissed it as nothing more than speculation. Still, his determination remained unshaken. For months, he had been preparing for this very moment, an eclipse that he believed would create the ideal conditions for testing his hypothesis. Van der Merwe had set up his instruments at an observatory on the outskirts of Cape Town, far from the bustle of the city. He had arranged for several colleagues to join him for the observation, though most were skeptical of his theories. Among them was Dr. Ingrid Malin, a brilliant experimental physicist who had collaborated with van der Merwe in the past. Despite their differing views on quantum mechanics, they shared a professional respect for each other's intellect. The eclipse was due to occur just after noon, and as the first rays of sunlight were obscured by the moon, the laboratory descended into a strange quiet. Van der Merwe stood in front of a series of high-tech instruments, meticulously monitoring the quantum detectors he had installed the night before. His eyes were fixed on the oscillating patterns of data that streamed across the monitors. It was then that something inexplicable happened. A sudden spike in the data, a sharp deviation from any normal readings, appeared on the screen. Van der Merwe quickly adjusted the controls, but the anomaly only intensified. It was as if the particles, which had been measured just moments before, were no longer behaving according to the laws of quantum mechanics. They seemed to be fluctuating, not in the usual chaotic quantum sense, but in a way that was systematic, deliberate, controlled. The detectors beeped erratically, and van der Merwe's heart skipped a beat. "Ingrid," he called out, his voice tight with tension. "You need to see this." Dr. Malin, who had been monitoring the visual feeds, looked up sharply. She walked over to his side and peered at the screen. Her face went pale as she observed the anomaly. "That's impossible," she murmured. "These readings, they're showing interference patterns, but not like anything we've seen before." For a brief moment, the two scientists were silent, both trying to process what they were witnessing. Quantum interference, a well-documented phenomenon, had been theorized to occur when particles interacted in specific ways, through superposition, or the superposition of different quantum states. However, the data now showed interference that wasn't simply a result of particle behavior. It seemed intentional. Could this be some sort of malfunction? Ingrid asked, trying to mask her unease. "No," van der Merwe replied sharply. "This is something else. This is what I've been waiting for." The eclipse was reaching its peak, and the sky outside had darkened, turning an eerie shade of twilight despite it still being the afternoon. The atmosphere within the observatory seemed charged, as if the universe itself had suspended its usual rules for this rare celestial event. Van der Merwe knew he was on the edge of something monumental. The data continued to fluctuate, showing strange patterns that resembled the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, but on a scale far beyond what was expected. Van der Merwe adjusted the settings again, hoping to stabilize the readings, but before he could, something else occurred. A shift. The data no longer showed mere fluctuations. It exhibited a new form of quantum behavior. The particles displayed characteristics that van der Merwe had never theorized. It was as though they were communicating with each other across vast distances, but there was more, something darker. It was as if the particles had become aware of their observation, reacting to their very presence. The uncertainty principle, which stated that the more precisely a particle's position was known, the less precisely its momentum could be determined, seemed irrelevant in this moment. These particles were somehow bypassing the normal laws of quantum mechanics, as though their very nature had changed. "Emil, this is impossible," Ingrid whispered, almost to herself. "These particles..." But she couldn't finish her sentence. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the entire laboratory was plunged into darkness. The monitors blinked out, leaving only the faint hum of the backup generator. Van der Merwe's heart raced as he scrambled for a flashlight, his mind spinning with the implications of the readings. Had they inadvertently triggered something with their experiment? Had they torn a rift in the quantum fabric of the universe itself? When the lights returned, the instruments began emitting an eerie static sound, and the data streams appeared distorted, almost indecipherable. The interference had intensified, but it wasn't just the equipment that had changed. It was as if the space around them had warped, a subtle distortion in the very air, an uneasy feeling that something was wrong, as if the laws of time and space themselves had begun to bend. Ingrid took a step back, her face pale with shock. "Emil, look at the monitor." Van der Merwe followed her gaze. The particles on the screen were no longer behaving like anything they had ever studied. They weren't just entangled, they were interacting across different dimensions, jumping from one reality to another with such rapidity that the entire quantum model seemed to be collapsing under the pressure. The eclipse was almost over, but the data didn't stop. It continued to pulse, growing in intensity, as if it were becoming a part of something far larger. The particles were not simply part of the experiment anymore. They had crossed into something far beyond human understanding. Then, the most unsettling thing of all happened. The room's temperature dropped dramatically, and a soft, unexplainable whisper filled the air. It was faint at first, like a distant voice calling from another world. Van der Merwe's blood ran cold as the whisper seemed to intensify, becoming clearer. "We are watching." The voice was chilling in its otherworldliness, as if it were coming not from the room, but from beyond the fabric of reality itself. It was not just a sound. It felt like a presence, an entity that existed just out of sight, peering into their dimension. Van der Merwe stood frozen, unable to speak. Ingrid, equally disturbed, took a step back toward the door. "We need to shut this down. Emil, we've gone too far." But Van der Merwe didn't hear her. His eyes were fixed on the screen, where the particles danced, shifted, and vanished into nothingness. The eclipse was over, but what had begun during that moment would change their lives and the understanding of quantum mechanics forever. The atmosphere in the observatory was thick with an unnatural tension. The solar eclipse had ended, but the repercussions of what had occurred during that brief moment of cosmic alignment were only beginning to reveal themselves. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, the quantum disturbances lingering in the air like a whisper just beyond comprehension. Dr. Emil van der Merwe stood motionless, still fixated on the flickering screen before him. His mind raced through the implications of what they had witnessed, the particles, the distortion, the voice. He had never believed in the paranormal, nor had he ever imagined that a quantum experiment could cause a shift in reality itself. Yet, standing there in the dim light of the observatory, he couldn't deny the eerie sensation that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Beside him, Ingrid Malin clutched her arms, visibly shaken. "Emil, we need to stop. Whatever we've unleashed, it's not natural. It's not just quantum mechanics. This is something else." Her voice trembled, betraying the fear she was trying to suppress. Van der Merwe turned to her, his face pale, but his eyes alight with the fire of discovery. "No, we can't stop now, Ingrid. Do you understand what this means? We've just witnessed something that defies everything we know. The particles weren't just entangled. They were accessing something, a different dimension, a state beyond this universe. This is beyond quantum physics. This is the next frontier." Ingrid shook her head. "But at what cost? We don't even know what those voices are. What if we've opened a doorway to something we can't control? Something we don't understand?" He paused, his gaze drifting back to the monitors. where the data was now completely scrambled. It was as if the quantum fluctuations had breached some unknown boundary, and now they were paying the price. The air felt dense, and the strange whispers had not ceased. They echoed faintly in the background, as though the very atmosphere around them was charged with a presence, a consciousness beyond their grasp. A sudden, sharp beep from the monitor interrupted the silence. Vander Merwe rushed to it, ignoring Ingrid's warning. The screen flickered and cleared for a moment, revealing a fresh set of data, but this time the readings were unlike anything he had ever seen. There were anomalies in the quantum states, signatures of energy that appeared to be feeding back into the system from a distant source. "What is this?" Ingrid whispered, leaning over his shoulder. The data points showed clear indications of a connection, an entanglement, not just between the particles and their experiment, but with something far greater. The source wasn't from their experiment at all. It was external. It was as if the quantum disturbances they had triggered were resonating with another reality, another dimension, one that was bleeding through. And then, the worst happened. The temperature in the room plummeted, far colder than before. A biting chill took hold of the observatory, and the lights flickered again. This time, they did not return. Darkness swallowed the room. Ingrid gasped, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Emil, we need to leave." But Vander Merwe was no longer listening. His focus was consumed by the data, which was becoming increasingly chaotic. The quantum anomalies intensified, their irregular pulses growing in frequency and magnitude. Suddenly, the whispering voice returned, louder this time, reverberating through the very fabric of the air. "We are waiting." The voice was no longer distant. It felt close, too close. Vander Merwe's heart pounded in his chest as the voice continued, now accompanied by an unmistakable presence. Something was in the room with them, something not of this world. Ingrid backed away, her panic rising. "Emil, it's too late. Whatever we've done, we've opened something we can't control. It's coming." At that moment, the walls of the observatory seemed to shudder. The very space around them warped and twisted, the air growing thick, heavy, as if the room itself was being pulled in multiple directions. Vander Merwe could feel his body tugged, as though it were no longer entirely anchored in this reality. He turned to Ingrid, his voice hoarse. "We can't go back now. We have to understand it, before it's too late." The whispers grew into a cacophony, overwhelming their senses. It was no longer just a voice. It was a chorus, a multitude of voices calling from across the void. Some of them sounded human, others strange and incomprehensible, as though they were speaking in a language older than time itself. With a sudden jolt, the observatory's door slammed open. Vander Merwe and Ingrid turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, a figure that seemed to shimmer, its form indistinct, as if it were not entirely part of this reality. "Who's there?" Ingrid screamed, but the figure did not respond. It stepped forward, and with each step, the air seemed to bend and distort around it. Vander Merwe felt a surge of adrenaline. He had no idea what they were facing, but there was one thing he knew for sure. This was no longer an experiment. This was a confrontation with something far beyond their understanding. Something quantum. Yes, but also something ancient. Something that existed beyond the laws of space and time. The figure's form flickered like a broken hologram. One moment it was tall and menacing. The next, it collapsed into a blur of light. The quantum anomalies on the monitors were now so violent that the instruments began to short circuit, sparks flying from the control panel. And then, in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. For a long moment, there was nothing but the oppressive silence of the observatory, broken only by the steady hum of the backup generator. Ingrid looked around, her eyes wide with terror. What? What was that? What just happened? Vander Merwe didn't answer at first. He was still staring at the monitor, where the data had settled into a strange calm, almost as if it were waiting. He understood now. What they had seen, what they had touched, was not a mistake. It was a message. The quantum disturbance had not just opened a portal to another dimension. It had connected them to something. Someone beyond time and space. The voices were not random. They were calling out, waiting. As the room began to return to normal, the whispering faded. The quantum fluctuations slowed, and the particles calmed, but the implications of what they had experienced lingered in the air, an unsettling presence that could not be easily dismissed. Vandermeer finally spoke, his voice low and grave. "Ingrid, this isn't over. We've only seen the beginning." And with that, the mystery of the quantum eclipse lingered in the minds of the two scientists, a mystery far greater than anything they had ever dreamed possible. The universe was vast, and what lay beyond the limits of their understanding was more enigmatic than they could have ever imagined.
The questions don't end here, nor does our pursuit. If this story unveiled something you never expected to discover, then you're in the right place. Remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this tale with others who, like you, are drawn to the unknown. Here, mystery always finds its voice, until we meet again, where the inexplicable will once again serve as our starting point.